Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for connecting, Rachel and Benji, and thanks for everyone who's tuning in live. We have so many registrants for this webinar. It was a very popular one, and we're so excited to talk about our latest CPG Unpacked, getting on and off the shelf. Um, Let me introduce you to my guests and longtime friends, Benji and Rachel. Benji is the Director of Customer Education at Spins, bringing over 15 years of experience on both the brand and retailer sides of business as he worked at Whole Foods once upon a time. And Benji's focus is on sales story support, category analytics, and product innovation for emerging brands. So if you have questions about any of those topics as we go, feel free to pop them in the chat and we'll do our best to address them in real time. And Rachel is a partner at Goldilocks, which is like a shopper marketing strategist firm where she helps CPG brands grow through sharp strategy and standout creativity. She brings deep experience in brand building and consumer insights to key inflection points from D2C to retail expansion. She previously was a CMO at Clio Snacks and leading its rise to national prominence. Thanks to you both for joining. I really appreciate it. Let's get started because there were so many questions from registrants. Oh, I guess I'll introduce myself. I'm Ashlie. I'm head of business development and one of the founding members here at Social Nature. We help natural brands win at retail through our digital sampling platform. Okay, so let's get started. And we'll just ping pong questions. Feel free to pop in and go off on a tangent as you see fit. From your experience, every brand is always asking us, what do retailers care about most during a brand pitch? It's a common question that our brands are asking, and I know you guys both have great intel on the insights that you use in prepping brands for these pitches. Rachel, why don't you go first?
Awesome. I think I always think of our relationship with a retailer as literally a dating relationship. You have to bring as much value to the retailer as they bring to you. And so I think when I'm thinking about a pitch with a retailer, it's what value am I bringing to that retailer that they don't have on shelf already? And that could be volume, like a pure velocity play, and you're telling a velocity story. It also could be an incrementality story. Again, it's about they want more dollars outside their register. They want more dollars to their set, either by driving new usage occasions, incremental kind of consumption consumers to that set or whatnot. And so an example with Clio is Clio is competing in the yogurt set at like high velocity, very competitive, very large brand driven category. And so if we were to play a game of just pure velocity, we would have lost that game over and over again. But what we did provide was an incremental value to the set. So we were bringing a dessert or an alternate occasion to the yogurt set. And so that's an example of like really framing and figuring out what value do I bring? What are they looking for? And how do I meet that need and tell the story accordingly? So I think it's really figuring out kind of where their gaps are and how do you fit that gap accordingly. I don't know your thoughts, Benji.
Well, you said that it's a relationship, right? And what's the foundational bedrock of any relationship? Honesty, maybe? I think that is really important, especially in the beginning of one of these, buyer kind of producer relationships, to just be honest. And if you're going to make a promise, you need to like keep that promise, right? And so it really, you know, it helps a lot if you're transparent and honest, whether you're talking about your supply chain or your ability to distribute or your ability to like, do special flavors or things like that. But basically, are you holding up your end of the deal? I mean, that's super important. But also to tag on, to another thing you said, I think that a really good understanding of your like what really makes you different, and how you can kind of like use that difference to uh, generate like shopper demand, and your strategies and tactics and how to do that. If you can kind of weave a really compelling narrative about that, that can take you a long way. So that's the fun answer. I think also one other aspect of it is having just a really like decent working understanding of like velocity, and also kind of like how you're going to support your product like post launch because it's one thing to just get on the shelf, but I mean, isn't the title of this webinar? It's about how to get off the shelf, right?
100%.
From a brand pitch perspective, funny enough, I was just on a call with an emerging brand before this, and she was taking care of most of the pitches herself. Is that like I'm curious to know, and we did the conversation did turn to like when to bring in a broker and like who owns that brand story and pitch. And it's a big hot topic lately these days as to like how much you can rely on your broker. But any kind of insights on like who owns that brand story and like and also at what stage do you want to start outsourcing some of those efforts in getting the word out about your brand?
I always think from a brand perspective, you need to be the most educated and deep on your brand. You're going to have the biggest, you are the driver of that brand and you have the kind of most to lose if you want to think it that way. But brokers, they've got a million brands on their plate in many cases, or maybe a small number, but inherently they're not solely focused on you. And so I think you have to know your brand narrative better than they do. I think what they often bring to the table though is like deeper category or deeper relational insight to understand what makes this buyer tick or what is important to this retailer in this category, things that would be outside of your brand control. And inherently mirroring and bring those two together is where I think the power of the brand broker relationship comes into play. So if you think about it, I'm trying to sell a product. I'm selling it into this retailer X. Retailer X may have a vision of what that category is going to look like holistically. And if I'm selling and trying to push a rock up a hill selling against their core strategy, it's going to go nowhere. So that broker, again, can be a really pivotal kind of insight driver to make sure that the sell story is going to stick. But the core kind of narrative of the brand, why you matter, why you're different, and why the retailer should be excited about you, I think really has to come from brand first. To think from that standpoint, that's like the dynamic I see between the two. I don't know your thoughts, Benji, and then I can layer on with timing, which is another critical question, but any thoughts there, Benji?
Yeah, I mean, I think the broker's strength is really all about like breadth, right? And it's like breadth of their network, you know? They know everybody. They have a really their iPhone contact list is like, miles long, right? But like any strength, it's strengths can be like good and bad, right? And like to your point, like brokers, they can represent like lots of different brands, or they can even have brands that are kind of similar to yours, which is a little sticky sometimes. So, when it comes to that sort of thing, I was kind of thinking about how to describe this the other day, but it's like I have an 8-year-old, and if he wants dinner, I I don't give him a box of spaghetti and some frozen meatballs. I make dinner for him, right? And like you kind of need to make your broker dinner. Like because you're the one who's the smartest about your brand story, you need to have like all of that like crystallized and hand offable so you can really make them like give them the best of what you have and then they'll run with it. That to me has been a winning dynamic I've seen in the past.
That's fair. One of the things that I really love and why I would consider myself in sales is that one of my favorite thing about onboarding new brands is this mechanism at Social Nature where we can ask custom questions along the consumer journey. And one of my favorite things is trying to anticipate what a retailer what we need to unpack for the retailer. So like, positioning, price, competitive landscape, direct competitors, and indirect competitors, and kind of help like de-risk the retailer's investment in the brand. And it's curious, I'm sure you've seen this too, Rachel. Like there's founders who think they already know everything it is about their brand, but like to validate and try to like create some checks and balances around that has been a really interesting exercise over the years. Because yeah, so I mean, any kind of thoughts on that? As I know, Rachel, you drive collaborated on brands such as these.
Yeah. I mean, like 9 times out of 10, as a founder, you are not your consumer. Right, like we are targeting an audience and a consumer that has both functional and emotional needs that we need to unpack, meet in the right way, the right place, the right time. And inherently, like that's kind of the core of what we do at Goldilocks is really like unpacking the strategic value you bring to that right consumer. And I think validating that, understanding, and then again, framing it in the right way for the retailer. And it's all through the lens of like, what do they care most about? right? I'm a marketer at heart. I love the kind of like emotional, like deep dive into the consumer, but that doesn't mean anything to the retailer. And what the retailer cares about is ultimately volume. And so it's how can I reframe that story for the retailer to get them to understand why I bring them value, again, through the lens. I always say it's like a simple math exercise or a simple decision tree. You're either bringing new consumers or incremental consumption from your current users. That's what you're ultimately trying to grow. And so how do we do that? And consumer insight can really help to kind of crystallize that, and then framing it in the right way to the shop or to the retailer is what can ultimately bring it across the line.
From a pitch perspective, so we should talk about timing, but also now same brand comes to mind. She's been in the Canadian market and going into the US, and I'm like, oh my gosh, the US market is an entirely different ballgame. You are going to need some help. But then also, and this comes up, and this is why I keep bringing it up, is that the ball game from going from regionals to natural and natural to conventional is also huge leaps and bounds. So I'm curious to know from your perspective, like, how does the pitch change? Are you actually, as a brand, like, does your brand story actually change? Because I can imagine would be like quite overwhelming, but also probably at some point you need variations of the pitch depending on who you're pitching to. Is that how you would be coaching these guys?
Yeah, for sure. Like, we work with a lot of like emerging brands, and there's always like two variants of their pitch, well, three variants of their pitch deck. There's like the natural one, there's like conventional one, and then there's like the investor one, right?
Ah,
But like, okay, Spins works with hundreds of retailers, and each chain is very different, right? So it's hard to generalize, but I'm gonna do it anyway. So, um, you know it's kind of like natural versus conventional storytelling. It's a little bit like vibes versus value. Okay. With natural retailers, and again, this is a generalization, like they care a lot about like the mission, the integrity of the ingredients, like the story to some regard. But your performance too. But in conventional, it's a lot more about like numbers, margins, promotions, pricing, having like broad appeal. That's generally how I kind of see it. And I guess I'll end it here. Like vibes can get you surprisingly far, like farther than you'd ever think. But there comes a time when the vibe rocket ship runs out of energy, and you really just need to like talk about like some kind of mind-numbing, boring number stuff, and then, but that's also a good thing because it kind of means like you're talking to bigger retailers and maybe you made it or you're starting to make it. So
Yeah, I would say I think like the core narrative of the brand doesn't change if you have a positioning that resonates across multiple customers. And what I mean by that is like, why this brand, why now? I think inherently the data story will change because if you think of every retailer has a different competitive set, like what SKUs are on shelf, like how big the set is, what the depth of distribution for you and or other brands is looks different by customer. And so inherently, like you're wanting to really be really, I think, targeted in how you sell to them to say, hey, this is what I'm asking for, and this is what I'm going to do for you, and this is the risk to your set specifically. But I think the inherent like reason to believe for the brand, the like point of difference, the like nugget of the brand itself should be consistent, because that'll at the end of the day is like what you're repeating to the consumer over and over again that's going to drive that repeat behavior. So that's like at a high level, I think super similar. I think natural is going to be probably more storytelling leaning, conventional more data driven, but I would say even more natural customers are becoming savvier and savvier on the data side as well.
yeah. I mean, and it's also what levers you have to pull to even support these smaller players. I mean, I think everyone's talking about how good of a job Sprouts has done with their Forager project. And it's a common trigger event to kind of bring brands to Social Nature's doorstep. So, vibes aside, because not everyone can be midday squares, and certainly, it's great if you have that swag, but you might not. So, within that 30 to 60 day time period, I mean, like that's the kind of innovation set often is you have 90 days to prove yourself. And I would argue that proving yourself at Sprouts is a whole different ballgame than proving yourself at Walmart. But let's just say, for argument's sake, what are some of the pieces, like key activities and benchmarks that matter, and maybe how does it change? Like from Sprouts to a Walmart.
I think at the end of the day, like movement off shelf is the indicator of success for a brand. It's like if a consumer is buying the product and buying it at a rate that's equal to or greater than, or showing the trajectory to be equal to or greater than the competitive set, then you've got a product that's winning. I think inherently when you think about kind of launching, there's always a little bit of risk reward. Like you want to over invest to make sure that we're seeing success. You also don't want to over invest and then have it fall off a cliff. So it's really, I think, about like strategically investing to drive trial, but then also building an effective plan to drive repeat. I think a lot of brands focus so much on trial, and it's great to build the pie, but it's way less expensive to get people to come back. So again, that doesn't like a little bit deviating off your question on the first 90 days. I think in that case, like focusing on efficient trial driving tactics and being really targeted to the consumer you're going after, so your likelihood of conversion is as high as possible, is really important. I would say in tandem though, making sure you're looking beyond the first 90 days to say, okay, I can dump all this money into this, but can I sustain that? What does sustainable marketing planning look like for a brand and or promotional planning, and making sure that there's a healthy balance between the two, is where what kind of how I would approach it. I don't know your thoughts, Benji.
Well, Sprouts is a really interesting example. I can walk to my Sprouts, which I'm like so stoked about, right? I love Sprouts. And Sprouts has like secretly two innovation centers, right? So there's one, the one that everybody knows about, that's like in the middle of the store. It's great, showcase for new products. And then there's the like kind of like it's like mirror image, which is the discontinuation rack in the corner of the store with like all the dust on it, right? And like it's really interesting to compare and contrast like what they're bringing in, and like highlighting versus kind of like what's sort of, in trouble. And so because often, and it's sad, you see brands that like are in the middle of the store one day and then 3 months later they're like over here for 70% off. And that's like a bummer, right? So I mean, I think that at a bare minimum, one of the best things you can do is just ensure that in your rollout is fine. And this is like boring, but like, making sure that your distribution network is solid, you're getting product to all the stores, you are auditing those stores and making sure that they have product on shelf. Like you're really being on top of that sort of thing, because like if your product's on the shelf, it's not going to move off the shelf, right? So once you can like secure that, then it really comes all about meeting your velocity target, which often they'll give you like, oh, here's the benchmark you need to like meet, for the first 60, 90 days, and like there are a lot of levers for that, and I think it's all very item dependent, but it kind of boils down to some sort of like outreach or education or some sort of like promotion that, really gets like your message across and drives trial. And hopefully if you're driving trial, those people are like interested enough to come back, because I mean, God knows I've bought things on there and I wish I hadn't.
Yeah, that's fair. Um, Another kind of like, so I feel like everyone's very excited about the Sprouts Forager project, and so they should be. They're doing a great job. Conversely, I would say at Social Nature, we work with like typically the top challenger brands, and everyone, all those brands were going like, winning and killing it at Whole Foods and Sprouts, and then we're getting, some tests at Walmart and Target, let's say 701 store locations, and now they're like, oh my gosh, help. And I was like, yeah, we got you. Those said brands are now pulling themselves out of Walmart in droves. So I'm curious to know, and I always love to ask the questions that like maybe is not like panel expo friendly, but like, is there truly a space on Walmart shelves for an emerging brand? And I'm not saying Poppy because that doesn't count. It has to be like an actual emerging brand, because I'm telling you, these brands are like, from my perspective, they are not killing it. And I get in this retracted market, like it's very hard to win when you're 40% more expensive than the conventional alternative, is I think what's happening, but I would love to know your insight because we need to help them.
Yeah. Well, okay. So one thing, I mean, like mass stores like Walmart, for example, have gotten significantly more friendly when it comes to smaller brand adoption. Like it wasn't like that, 10, 15 years ago, right? They've gotten a lot more open to that. And like one brand that a guy I know from naturally Colorado, Ben Bacon, he has Lentiful, which is like these lentil cups. Walmart was one of his like earlier kind of chains that he got into. And it's a big deal, but it takes a lot of resources to support that sort of thing. And like the other thing that you got to know is that, retailer like promotional strategies are heavily tied to like their identity, right? Like so Wegmans, and Walmart actually are both like EDLP or everyday low price retailers, and Publix, right? BOGO, retailer. That's like their thing, you know? And so like if you go into an EDLP retailer, you better have some strategy that's not promotion based to like try and drive trial, and get off the shelf there because that is like honestly one of the biggest tools that you can have, and they're just kind of ripping that away from you. So,
I was gonna say, I think it comes down, not to sound like a broken record with consumer, but like, is your consumer a Walmart shopper? And not,
yeah.
and I think the Walmart shopper is evolving, but inherently, I think emerging brands can win. I could think of two examples. Um, Brahmi, who we work with, is a better for you protein pasta. It's delicious. It's priced to a premium to the competitive set, but is crushing in Walmart. And I think inherently it has a price pack architecture that works. It provides an experience that is premium to the cheaper option. And subsequently the repeat rate is extremely high. So I think it's getting the trial, it's driving it via like very targeted strategic tactics to get the right shopper to trade up. And then again, it's providing an offering that wins and tastes good to bring them back. And so I think it's all about like right product, right consumer. Clio's another example. We actually, our first national customer was Walmart, which is so reverse a typical natural food brand. We went from Whole Foods Northeast to Walmart. This story is actually the Walmart buyer called Sergey, the CEO and founder, and said, like, I want your product in my innovation set. And inherently, again, like from a price pack architecture, a product offering, a point of differentiation, it worked. But again, that's not all brands. It's not a one size fits all. It's not every brand should go from Whole Foods to mass. It's about like, does that shopper, do you have a shopper audience there to capture? And if so, and maybe that's not all Walmarts too. Maybe that's a subsegment of Walmarts that is the right audience for you. And so really being like poignant about who's there, is my audience there, and when's the right time to trigger it to Benji's point, it's expensive. So subsequently like making sure you have the resources to support it.
Yeah, that's a great point. Also Walmarts are segmented into like three
Mhm.
different types of stores, right? So there's like, your normal Walmart, and then there's like the super Walmart, and then there's like the grocery store Walmart, right? And so I think knowing your customer, maybe you want to go into the grocery store Walmart. Maybe your customer is not going to buy yogurt bars and a set of tires. I mean,
Right.
like, there is like some segmented differentiation in that chain, which is very important to know about.
And I think playing with your price pack architecture, like there's a really interesting opportunity. That's how Clio actually unlocked was we sold single bars that were $1 in Walmart, as opposed to a 4-pack or a multi-pack, which would have been probably too expensive at launch. But inherently, it was a great trial driver. And now, since the brand, when I was still there, flipped to 4-packs, flipped to multi-packs, and have driven up the dollars per transaction, but it started with a trial driving vehicle. And so inherently, as you think about price pack architecture across mass, grocery, club, whole natural, it's like thinking about how are you offering the shopper something that they actually can and want in a form factor and at a price that makes sense for them. And again, if you are a super premium offering that doesn't work, then maybe that's not the right place for you. And that's okay. There's plenty of brands that grow and become very, very large brands, successful brands, not penetrating mass to the depths that other brands do.
Can I tag
Yeah, I
on to
love.
that too?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like, price pack architecture is a great way of like thinking about kind of like close to the chest expansion strategies and innovation strategies. But, it's predicated on the fact of like having an item or a product or a suite of products that actually work,
Huh?
right? So like Olipop, for example, they went into club and mass stores, right? With like 4-packs and 6-packs. And these aren't 6-packs of banana cream, right? They're six packs of like root beer and vintage cola or whatever. So it's kind of like nailing your fundamentals first and then scaling those up a little bit. And that can really work well in these mass and club retailers.
Yeah, I was also just going to say that there is nothing worse than when a brand comes to me with like a $40 tub of whatever, and there's like no smaller, like you that there's no way to break it up into like bite-sized pizzas. There's no sachets, there's no nothing. So like I think Rachel, like to your point, the single SKU, being able to sell that, being able to promote it, doing BOGOs against that, like breaking your pack into smaller bite-sized pieces just makes your whole life so much easier. Because no one is going to buy your full size product without having the opportunity to taste. Whether it's, like it's just an affordable price point, or whether you want to do sampling thereafter, whatever, we all need to like have some kind of mechanism to get your product into people's mouths before we expect the resale opportunity. Which I think there's a huge, I noticed another emerging trend, which I appreciate, which is to your point, we can keep going after new customer acquisition all day long, but it is so expensive and unsustainable. And like, I think this whole growth versus profitability, of course, everything is pushing to profitability. So, what are some like mechanisms that you actually see that are working to help facilitate that, like the turn rates amongst those new customers or current customers? What do we like? Do you have like a lever that I know this will always work kind of play?
I think there's a couple of pieces. Like one, understanding your current consumer's behavior. And like my favorite measures to look at are frequency, basket size, like trips per annually, like any measure to tell me what percentage of my customers are coming back. And of those customers, how often are they shopping with me? And subsequently, how can I then like scale and grow that? Because it can be either increasing basket size or bringing them back more times that can really help to scale the business quickly. I think there are more and more opportunities and tactics to do so, whether it be targeted discounts, but offering like a first time higher incentive offer and then scaling back that to either a multi unit or a lower value second time trial offer. That can be through sampling tools, that can be used through discount tools. There's a lot of vehicles to do that. But I think like reminding the consumer to come back, getting it into their routine behavior to come back and getting them to try again, like the likelihood of getting the second gets you a higher likelihood of the third. And you just need to repeat, like build that repeatable buying behavior. I think another big one is retail media platforms allow now for a lot more kind of repeat targeting behaviors or opportunities. And so being able to utilize those amazing trial driving platforms like the Instacarts and the WMCs and the Roundels and so on, but using those not only to drive first time users, but also repeat behavior. And so inherently like utilizing them to do both and segmenting your audiences accordingly, I think can also be another great tool to make sure you're not just focused on the like hot new friend in the room. It's really about the kind of long-term sustainable shopper.
Yeah, retail media is definitely anybody on this call that doesn't know what retail media is, like, don't feel bad because it's like not that old.
It's also like not that intuitive. Like there are still lots of things for us all to learn on retail media side.
Yeah, 100%. And it really only became like a big thing like post-COVID because like um yeah, I mean, retail media basically is like a closed loop attribution ecosystem. It's all about ads. I mean, right? Oh, I'm going to go on Sam's Club's app and see if they have soda. And when I search for soda, it's going to be like, I'm going to search for Red Bull. But then it gives me a Monster Energy ad, like, a post search. That's retail media, like in a nutshell, right? But it also measures like the people that click on that ad, the efficiency of that ad, and then you can break down if it was a good ad or not based on the creative or the spend or whatever. And like but my point is though, it's like this wasn't really in the playbook 10 and definitely 15 years ago. So people who, you might have like a long-standing broker or something who has a lot of experience, but they don't know about this sort of stuff. It's like kind of this new emerging tool that can be really cool. So I encourage you to educate yourself about it. Spins as a company, we're investing more into retail media too, our capabilities there because it is becoming a much more important source of not only like understanding who's buying your stuff, because that's the question, who's buying this, right? But also like being able to directly see how efficient they are at buying your stuff. And that is kind of magical.
I always think about it. It's like the one place you can actually follow a consumer through a store, which sounds
Mm.
strange, but inherently there's been such a disconnect between our ability to market and getting the shopper data from the in-store environment. And what's been really amazing about a transformation and consumers now shopping digitally for retail-based products is that inherently you can kind of follow that consumer journey and have kind of more ripe data on how the consumer is engaging with your brand. So Instacart, for example, you can dig into the exact decision tree I was talking about. Like, what's your frequency? What's your repeat rate? What's your basket size? And how do we change our behaviors and our marketing investments based on how the consumer is engaging with the brand and the category so that we can strategically kind of meet the shopper where they are?
Okay, but I have a question for you because so what's interesting about the social nature community is only about 10% of our shoppers are Instacart shoppers, which is interesting to me. And I do feel like there is a bit of a risky thing that's happening right now. So I am a millennial mom. I have two kids under 5. I would never be an Instacart shopper. I'm a CPG dork. I love grocery shopping. It's like one of my favorite, it's like one of my most favorite pastimes as a chore. Now I'm in the CPG business, so okay, whatever. But that being said, I worry that brands are over investing in a strategy that is very like D2C leaning shopper. I worry it's not a very loyal shopper. There is like a different demographic to an Instacart shopper than there is our community. I'll just say that point blank. So I'm curious. Are like what how are we advising brands in this regard? Because I feel like I just talked to one of my clients and they're like, we're pulling back all of our spending and we're dumping it into Instacart, and they're a tiny little brand with not a lot of distro. And I was like, okay, let's see how it goes, right? Like, I mean, is there a risk to over relying on these strategies?
I think it's a balance of the two. I wouldn't ever advise a client to be like, put 100% of it in retail media. Like, inherently, to your point, it's still a small percentage of shoppers that are digitally native or digitally shopping for their groceries. I am one of those that does a split. Like, sometimes I go into the store, but I also have a 2 and a 5-year-old, and sometimes I'm like, just bring it to my doorstep. Like, I cannot deal. I think for brands, one of the challenges though is I always say you have a pool of money. And that pool of money is constrained. It's not like I have cash that's continuing to flow in. And so it's about efficiency of that as well. So like, how efficient is it? Is that dollar? I think pushing on retail media and saying, am I getting repeat off that dollar? Yes or no? If I am, then I can continue to scale because then I know I'm piping people back into the funnel. But if I'm not, then diversifying tactics to make sure that you're driving not just a digitally native shopper, but all other shoppers, and targeted. I'll say all other targeted shoppers because they have to be your right consumer. So I think there is a balance that has to be played. I think you can't go entirely one way or the other. That said, I think again, in more cash constrained environments where marketing is getting often the axe as either tariffs are impacting businesses or whatnot, it is and can be a very efficient way to get eyeballs and be very targeted in who you go after with those eyeballs. So it's always, I think, a balancing act between the two.
That's fair.
Yeah, I think that bad news alert. It's one more thing you got to do, and like you need to be good at it, like um but don't neglect the other levers that are easily within reach that have been traditionally like very good. And I think like your traditional methods of like promotional based strategies and things like that are they're more like nets. They can capture large amounts of people, whereas like your retail media strategies are more like a fishing line where like you're really getting a much smaller catch here, but it's like kind of higher quality and you can understand it a little bit better, but you need to be able to like play both games like simultaneously. And I would definitely warn any brand against like going too deep on any side because it used to be that you would only go deep on one side, but now you kind of have to play both ends of the field.
Okay, another topic that I feel like is hot, and this is also good, so I'm just going to keep it rolling. Okay, I was surprised to see a bit of a resurgence of D2C brands. So brands with a D2C. So like, a couple years ago, I want to say that brands were starting to like grow out of their D2C business and kind of sunset that approach and go on like a retail first and you can only scale in store. And now all of a sudden brands are like, no, 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 I care about D2C again. And I was like, okay, is there something that I'm missing? So, I mean, I've heard anecdotally from brands, it's like, oh, it's a good way to build loyalty. I, for one, do not buy directly from a brand's website. I would never, I'm not gonna pay for shipping and handling. I just don't care. So like, so I'm curious to know, what are your guys' thoughts on like how big, like, how reliable is a D2C approach, especially at the 10 million plus mark? Because that's where I'm surprised to see brands are like, no, 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 we want D2C again. I was like, okay, it's new to me, but like, what's your thoughts on that front?
I think it's very product dependent. Like it sounds like I'm putting a massive asterisk, but like inherently, I think there are a lot of categories consumers will not buy online. Like they just won't, or it'll be a small segment of your business. So I think it's first thinking through again the lens of like where are consumers shopping for this product and how readily available am I? An example is like when we launched Clio, I came in right ahead, like right as we were going from about 500 doors to 2000. And we launched a D2C business. Primarily, it was margin neutral, but the intent was basically to capture volume that wasn't available in retail because we didn't have the broad distribution at the time. And then as we grew distribution, we scaled back that side of the business because the margin wasn't there. So I think a critical question is like, do you have the distribution to capture your audience effectively in retail? Two, are consumers even shopping for that category in a D2C environment? Because if you're forcing non-regular behavior to make someone go out of their way to buy this one random thing on D2C, chances of it happening are slim. That said, on the reverse end with D2C, you have a lot more data and a lot more direct connection to your shopper. So inherently, you're going to get a lot more kind of like one-to-one interaction and insight, which is super valuable and can be an unlock to help also drive your retail business. And I think the second thing that's a kind of positive or what's driving it is probably the growth of TikTok Shop. Like inherently consumers are discovering in digitally native environments and either converting directly on TikTok Shop or going to D2C as their first stop to go convert on a product they just saw if they don't feel comfortable converting on TikTok. We've seen a lot of halo effect on Amazon because of TikTok Shop. And so I think that is also maybe shifting some consumers' buying behaviors. It'll see again how far it penetrates category, because I think there's categories that inherently feel more natural than others. But I think that's a secondary driver of why we're seeing that shift back.
Oh, can I just talk about my two pet peeves with the TikTok Shop, by the way? And it's like when any video is like, oh, the viral throw, the viral ice cream bar, the viral blah blah blah. I hate that phrase. It's so overplayed these days. And then also the one where they're like, oh, we set the prices too low and somebody's gonna get fired. Like I hate that too. It's just I hear it in all the ads. But um we were talking about like a 10 million break point, right? So like if you're under $10 million in sales, T2C is great because it is a good place for you to kind of like understand your audience and kind of like test your concept, but then you can make some money doing it. Maybe the margins aren't the best, but margins in retail kind of stink too. But it really depends on your item, right? If it's a frozen item, that's totally different versus like a shelf stable item, right? But post $10 million, 10 to $100 million, right? That's like an interesting space where like you're not going to rapidly scale your company by investing a lot of money in that channel. However, you can like test new ideas in it. And that is like really interesting too, because sometimes there are like cross-pollination opportunities where you tried out, maybe a seasonal flavor or something like that, and you had a really strong response to it, on D2C. But then you can offer that seasonal flavor like the next time the season comes up to a retailer or something, because you can lean on that data and say like, this is like our hottest thing that we tried out there. And like doing LTOs, limited time offers, or other things like that in the shop can be really fascinating and give you different ways to engage with your customer. And I mean, like one example that pops to mind is like Goodles, right? Shelf stable item lends itself easily to shipping. They have a pretty cool D2C shop, and you can buy a macaroni and cheese ring. I mean, like what? I mean that's kind of fun, and I think speaks to like the playfulness of a brand, and you can manifest it well in that way.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, I have a registering question here and I don't want to ignore it. So, How can distributed brands hold their own against retailer fees, deductions when satisfying their retailer? So I guess the question is, is it truly a pay to play? And at what point can you start like pushing back on these suggested strategies? And I will say that, funny enough, I have a lot of brands who are not even big enough to get to the pay to play model. So like it's not always, even if you wanted to give Walmart money, they're not taking your 25K a month to be on an end cap. So it's not as black and white as I think a lot of brands realize. But curious to know your guys' thoughts on that because I think it is a pretty hairy topic for brands.
Do you want to jump in, Benji, or I can't either way?
Well, I mean, I think that the dirty secret in grocery is that there's just not money to be made selling groceries to people, right? You know, and so like, you think about that, like UNFI, right? Don't they have like a 7 or 8% markup or something on their items, like Whole Foods, for example, and they're not making money off that. So what are they making money off of? It's like fees and deductions and stuff like that. It's just like um you just have to accept that, like that sort of mindset and like bake it into your margins, hopefully, and hopefully you can survive it that way. It's just kind of like the cost of doing business. Now, that being said, like you don't have to do everything that's suggested. Like when I worked for a small brand, for my very first company, like one I don't even think they do this anymore, but like I was getting pressured from one of my distributor to do like print ads in their catalog. What a
They still
waste
do
of
it.
money.
They still do it,
Oh
Benji.
my God.
So yeah, that shows you yeah, what they're trying to get done.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, who's looking at that? Like you order online. Nobody's looking at this print catalog. But I mean, and that's an extreme example, and unfortunately still an example, I guess. But like there are lots of those kind of like pitfalls, and so here's my advice. Uh, you know, always in the back of your mind, have like an example brand of like who you want to be. Who do you want to be when you grow up?
Love
Like
that. Yeah.
think about that a lot. And like look at their data if you can and see like what worked for them, And there will be things that are hidden from your view, but like that can give you a good guidance on like how you can grow in a similar fashion. So
Yeah, I think to your point, Benji, I don't think you can, it's not like you can all avoid and negotiate everything. There are things I think you can, especially at the kind of ad fee and trade show, like distributor trade show level, et cetera. Like everything is negotiable. I would say like everything is negotiable. There's going to be some ones, there's going to be some things you can't achieve. I think it's though being really stringent about how you grow and how fast you grow and where you grow. Cause you could go and you could pay slotting for every customer under the sun, but are you ready? Do you have the
mm,
visibility? Do you have the right product? Do you have the right consumer target? Are you able to reach them to get them to convert? If the answer is no, those dollars are better focusing on the customers you're at, reinvesting to get pulled there, and then driving the volume to be able to go to the next guy. I think a lot of brands jump to big banners because they're sexy and they're cool. I want to be an Albertsons Safeway. That's great. It's a lot of cash. And do you have the capital to be able to invest both in slotting, promos, and the ongoing investment to get shoppers to shelf? If the answer is no, maybe not the right time. And that doesn't mean to no forever. It just means no for now. And I think that's one of the hardest things for founders and leaders to say is no. ACV
mm.
is really sexy. It's really attractive, but I think it's the right ACV at the right time that is really meaningful to kind of sustaining the brand for the long term.
And I
Yeah.
think maybe the right relationship with the buyer. Like, because I have had a lot of brands, I think we touched on this a little bit earlier, where they're like, oh, I like need to go all in, otherwise I'm at risk of getting delisted. And I think I'm like, but then you're going to get delisted and have spent $250,000 this month alone on promotions. Like, I'm going to get in trouble, but you're also going to get in trouble, and this isn't going to look good. So like, I don't know, like I kind of feel like these buyers, like if you're at so close to getting delisted, like this just might not be the relationship, because it's not, to everyone's point, it's the relationship too. Like if this buyer isn't willing to bet on you, then I don't know. I kind of feel like at any point the delisting conversation, I'm like, oh, this is where you just need to really like take a look at your strategy overall.
Yeah, it's like don't pay to salvage
No.
if it's not salvageable, because that's not a
There you go.
sustainable long-term business. Like you can't keep pumping in the dollars to keep the volume coming. There is inherently an issue, whether it's a pricing issue, whether it's a product issue, whether it's a consumer like is not at that point of distribution, there's some challenge, and unpack that first, solve for that, and then figure out how do I pivot accordingly, because that'll be more sustainable.
Okay, lasting thoughts, lasting advice. I feel like I want to be mindful of everyone's time. It's been such a fruitful conversation, so I appreciate your both input, and I feel like people are going to reach out to you for follow-up questions, so feel free to do so on LinkedIn. I'm sure you guys are both open to that. But yeah, any closing thoughts on how to win in this crazy market of ours?
I have one. It's something I was kind of thinking about earlier today, and it's like this is mainly for smaller brands who are like doing something interesting, okay? Maybe weird, okay?
I love weird.
Like if you're doing something truly novel, you know, um, you really are going to have to spend a lot of money on education, you know? And being the first to market sometimes is like not great. And it's honestly more expensive, you know? And so if you're kind of like you think, and I don't know which one of these came first, but you get the idea. Like, could there be an Olipop without a Poppy, you know, or the other way around? Like, sometimes a well-funded competitor who's doing something similar but not exactly the same can like blaze a trail that you can a little bit more easily like walk behind. And in the data, if their thing looks kind of like your thing in a sense, like maybe of the same functional ingredient or something like that, that could actually be like a positive, right? Because you're like, oh, I'm like them, but this thing is different, right? You know, that could be like a great way to kind of like travel. But back to the weird thing, you know, like I just think that if you're doing something that is like unknown to a person or even like unpronounceable to the majority of people, you know, you really need to invest so much more money and time and spend into like marketing and education and demos and sampling, but just like building up your kind of customer base from scratch because that is like an extremely hard um, road to go down, you know. So and just think to yourself like as your customers are like a funnel, right? You know. And every stage that you put them through winnows down people, you know. So earlier this week, I was like looking at it was a drink, and I was looking at the marketing for this because it had like sort of an unpronounceable name. It had sort of like a strange functional ingredient in it, and it was the romance copy on their website said it was a mocktail you drink in the morning, and I was like, oh my God, who is this for? You know?
Yeah.
So how many hoops are you making people jump through? Just be very cautious about that. If you're making them jump through one or two, okay, educate. But if it's more than that, take a step back and really reanalyze kind of like what you're doing.
I think I'll kind of riff off that, Benji. I think at the end of the day, you need a clear, understandable point of differentiation that can be easily understood by a consumer when they have the attention of less than a goldfish on shelf.
Hmm.
So, like, what is your clear point of differentiation, and how do you articulate that in a way on pack and at every touch point that's repeatable and easy to understand? And I would say that's like one critical thing brands have to do. And I always call it the sandbox. What sandbox are you playing in that no one else plays in? That is the triangulation of consumer demand, differentiation from the competitive set, and like attributes about you that are true. I think the other thing is focus. I think there are so many squirrels. I'll use like that we clearly watch Up in our house. There are so many squirrels, or there's so many kind of like easy, distractible things to go after. Instead, kind of the consistently focusing on what is my objective for this business at this life stage, and how do I get to that objective, and do each of the decisions I'm making ladder up to that. That could be a distribution, that could be new product launches, that could be whatever it may be. But focus, I think, is so critical and sometimes feels so hard when they're especially early stage, when there's so many opportunities, but I think can be make or break to a business in especially cash constrained environments.
Yeah, I love that. I will just add that I think one of the things that I love about Social Nature is that we're serving a demographic that is like me, where we are kind of meeting the brand and the shopper at the intersection point in store, where I'm actually getting the brand on the person's shopping list. And so that meeting, kind of that intersection point of not asking someone to go outside of their ordinary shopping habits, but then to have targeted them at that right touch point is key. So like having that true pull through strategy. So yeah, I mean, we're all busy and it's a constrained market and those marketing dollars need to work overtime. So I appreciate it. But yeah, I think that the coverage that we had today was amazing. And thank you so much to both of you for your time. And so excited to have you here today. And yeah, I know the brands appreciated it too. So thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.